this is the point where I'm also turning the event over to Dr. Murshid, who's going to be moderating the panel, and then the rest of the presenter for the day. So I just wanted to do a quick introduction of Dr. Murshid because she has been a really important part of this planning process. So Dr. Nadine Shaanta Murshid is an assistant professor here at the UB School of Social Work. Her area of interest and research includes structural sources of violence, economic institutions, and health. She has been a crucial part of the planning process, and her perspectives on social justice issues both globally and locally has helped to frame the narratives of this year's symposium. I would also like to point out a very recent article publication that was just released by Dr. Murshid titled An Assessment of the Association Between Asset Ownership and Intimate Partner Violence in Pakistan, featured in Public Health, and looks at the association between women's reports of asset ownership and intimate partner violence, including physical violence, emotional violence, and husbands' controlling behaviors. So Dr. Murshid will now lead us in the moderated panel, and I'll let her take it from here.
Well, good afternoon. Can everyone hear me? I think that's a yes. Well, my job here is pretty clear. I introduce the panel and then have a great discussion about research for the public good in the arena of water. So we have with us Nirupam Aich from the Department of Civil, Structural and Environmental Engineering, and he has a specialty focus on water resource engineering. Emmanuel Boma is an assistant professor, this is him here, with the Department of Urban and Regional Planning and the Community for Global Health Equity, University of Buffalo, and he researches and teaches a course titled Water Politics here at UB. Both of their profiles fit really well into this planning program, and it's not just because that they're my friends that they are here, because when my colleagues looked at this, they were like, oh, they're your friends, aren't they? I was like, yes, but they also do water. So here they are. And then we have Dr. Saya, who is an ORIS postdoctoral fellow with the United States Forest Service Center for Integrated Forest Science, and she's an affiliate of North Carolina State University. She is part of a water and soil lab that focuses on improving water quality. And from what I know, she's also done work in the greater Buffalo region, and we look forward to hearing more about that as well. To add to that, Nirupam has done work in Bangladesh, and Emmanuel has done work in Ghana. And I think we should have a really great discussion about some of the things that are similar and different in all these parts of the world. So the first question that I have for them is, how do you interface with water in your area of expertise? And we'll start with Nirupam.
Thank you, Nadine, for inviting me, and I'm glad to talk about my research and how it interfaces with the water area, and not only that, and with the symposium.
I'm sorry, the microphones need to be closer
very
to your
close.
mouth
Okay.
because it's not picking up at all.
Can you hear me now? Okay, I can hear me now. So, yeah. Okay, so I have two different directions in research. Both are connected to water. The first area which I have done work mostly in my PhD, and I'm continuing that research, is the nanotechnology area. I don't know how many of you know about nanotechnology. These are very cool stuff to most of the people, and not very much understood by general people, because we don't like to talk about that to general public that much, and because we need to make ourselves looking very much sciencey. But the main point is, we are nowadays, everyone is using nanotechnology, because all our smartphones are possible because of nanomaterials, and the nanomaterials are basically solid particles which are made of the same chemical elements that we have been using for many, many years, but at very small, minute scale we can control the properties, and that's why they become very effective in having many different applications. So, so that aspect of my research has been doing in two directions. One is how we can use nanomaterials for water treatment, and the other aspect has been how nanomaterials, since they are made out of chemical elements, if they can become toxic are hazardous to humans and other microorganisms and environments. So that has been the two areas. And after I came to UB, I started looking at nano-enabled products, and the most common product is all the electronics that we use. So I started working on electronics, and our project has gone to Bangladesh because electronic waste is a global issue. And it's not only for public health, it's degrading the environment. So all the electronics we use here are in developed countries and also in developing countries. They are not going to be dumped in developed countries. Mostly we are dumping them in developing countries and low-income countries like Bangladesh, Ghana, and other China. And there are 10 to 15 countries where there are mostly e-waste pollution that is happening and public health is impacted by that. So we are currently looking at how this injustice of created by the digitization and developed countries in developing countries that is happening, hurting the environment and public health. So even if we go into local level in Bangladesh, what we see that there is a hierarchy in terms of in terms of workers. We see a gender discrimination. So if you compare e-waste cell phone repair versus when you do cell phone recycling, you take apart the cell phone. So the repair versus recycling, the repair work is more technical and it has high pay, and in that case, and it has low contamination and exposure to toxicity to public health. So in that case, males are doing the major of the work, men are doing the majority of the work. And on the other side, when it's more unhygienic, the e-waste recycling, and which is dominating the contamination and public health risk, in that case, women and children are being exposed to that contamination. So with Dr. Murshid, we are actually looking at the gender issues in that aspect. So looking at injustice in gender issues. So that's my 30-year-long plan to work in Bangladesh. I don't know where it will take me and can I even do it, but that's a start. And I'll take it to Dr.
Boma.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Murshid, and then thank you so much to the rest of the panelists, and thank you to the School of Social Work for such a wonderful panel. My answer to this question, I am trained as an interdisciplinary scholar, so my areas of research spans the areas of water, food, and then land. So this is what I understand, or this is what I've been studying for the past couple of years. When I think of water, I think of land, and when I think of land, I think of food. So these three things go hand in hand. I don't leave any out. And my research has been in the area in the US and then also in Ghana. So I study water systems and water governance systems in both the US and in Ghana. And the reason, for example, why I think of these three systems as together is that when you are looking at water issues in global south countries or in countries like Ghana, we have a long history of colonialization. And one of the things or the effect of that is that it has created a complex legal environment for both water, land, and then food systems. And if the urban is going to continuously grow, one of the issues we are facing in global south, and especially Accra, Ghana, which is Ghana's capital, is that we have an issue where farmers have to deal with the issue of land right at the same time water right. So these are some of the issues that I look at in my work. In the US specifically, this is what I'm going to focus on. So my work has been in the area of water governance. So that is broadly how I study water issues. In water governance, what I'm interested in is collaborative governance. This has become very interesting for some of the scholars in my field because we are thinking of the appropriate institutional arrangement to deal with water issues. So sometimes we don't just think about water or water issues as just a technical problem, because sometimes some of us believe that most of the technology that we need, the science and technology, the innovation that we need in dealing with water issues are there. Often the problem is the politics. And the issue is, how do we design an appropriate institutional framework such that the technical side and then the governance side can work hand in hand in dealing with issues about water governance? And one of the issues of my research has used several different methodologies, but we are studying the different factors that make actors decide to collaborate in governance systems, because we realize that issues about trust, information sharing becomes very important when we are dealing with some of the complex issues we face in water systems. Actors don't like to talk to each other. We have the US federal agencies that intervene in water systems, and that their intervention do not necessarily align with the way the local indigenous institutions and local organizations see how water is supposed to be treated. And we have to find ways and means of making all these complex and numerous actors come together in order to address the issues, the complex issues facing water governance. And it is through these kinds of analysis that I use those frameworks in understanding issues about environmental justice, or what is even justice when we are talking about water or environment. And I'll be more than glad to share my insight on that as we go on.
Great, Dr. Saya.
Hi, yes. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
All right. Okay, great. Thank you for inviting me to the panel. I have a background in engineering, and specifically hydrology and biogeochemistry, so very technical, as the previous speaker mentioned. And I work for the U.S. Forest Service in North Carolina. And North Carolina is subjected to have increased temperature change due to climate, which will lead to more extreme flooding and drought in the region. And so this is definitely where water ties into my work. And so just as the previous speaker mentioned, we're trying to not only look at technical predictions for the region using hydrologic models, but we're also trying to bring in some demographics data into our analyses in order to look at vulnerable communities and try to overlay the hydrologic model outputs with communities that we know might be vulnerable. And I can talk a little bit more about how we're using the demographics data to assess vulnerability. But those are like the main reasons, or the main goals of our project, is to identify locations in this watershed in North Carolina that are vulnerable to climate change. That includes flooding and drought. Yeah, and I think that's pretty much it for how my work relates to water.
Do you want to continue and talk about how it connects to justice? You talked about vulnerable communities and how you're using demographic data to figure that out. What are you seeing?
For my work, we know that not everyone has equal resources in order to prepare, respond, and recover and adapt to climate change, specifically in my case to flooding. And then at the same time, we often see that some of these, especially vulnerable communities, they lack resources and are also located in spaces that tend to flood more. So they're in these locations that tend to flood more in low-lying areas, especially, well, this is true in North Carolina and in other places. And we also know that they might not be well represented in watershed planning efforts. And so the goal is to identify areas where people are vulnerable, and then try to broaden the stakeholder group that's included in watershed planning. And so this has been looked at by several different researchers. And it's important to include all of the stakeholders, including the ones that are vulnerable to flooding and climate change.
Great, thank you. Could we switch to Dr. Boma here to talk a little about water justice?
So this is really quite, when I saw this, I said this is quite complex because when I'm thinking of justice is a very, it's very heavy and a very complicated terminology in my opinion, right? Because justice for who, for what? And then those questions come into play. But I'll try and then link my work in terms of talk about two connections that my work speaks about the issues about justice. So the number one issue is that when I think of justice, justice is a governance question, in my opinion. That is how my research thinks of justice. So for example, environmental justice. It is a governance question because who is included in the decision-making process decides what is just. And so if we think of water or environmental justice as a governance question, then we start asking the question, who decides and who defines justice when it comes to the environment? And that becomes very important for me in my conversations about this. And a couple of examples. For example, in my work, I dealt with the Middle Road Grant in New Mexico. And we are looking at the issues about collaborative governance. And one of the things we see is that we have these multiple actors, and then all of them come with their own view of justice, what environmental justice means, for example, in dealing with water resources. So we have all these federal agencies which are or who are involved in constructing all these different projects when it comes to environmental or water project. They all have their own conception of justice, and I call this justice from above. But there's also environmental justice from below. This is based on what local organizations, native tribes think of justice or how justice could play out in the water resources. The problem is that we need to find a space where these two people or these two groups of individuals could come together and then construct what justice is. So in my opinion, perhaps justice is not so much of a predetermined position of actors, but it becomes more of a negotiated space where we have actors coming together to define what justice should even mean when it comes to issues about environmental justice. The second thing has to do with, or the second point I say to this is, to me, justice also cannot be excluded from issues about trust and then information. And then justice can also, when we think of justice, for example, environmental justice, we also have to understand that it is connected with social and economic justice. So my work in Ghana plays this out in a little bit. So one of the big issues we are facing in Ghana when it comes to water resources is pollution of the water resource. We have so much pollution of the water bodies, and it's coming from individuals or small-scale mining individuals who are trying to mine alluvial diamonds and gold from the water bodies. At the same time, they are trying to mine from the land resources. When we talk of environmental justice, the question becomes, do we criminalize the activities of these small-scale miners? But that becomes an easy solution, because when we start criminalizing the activities of these small-scale miners in the way of saving the environment, then in a way, implicitly, we start criminalizing poverty, because most of these individuals are not just partaking in mining or alluvial mining for its own sake. They were born into it. It's almost similar to the coal miners in the US. So the question is, how do we make sure that we achieve environmental justice but not sacrificing the social and economic justices that we also have to achieve? And this is one of the questions we try to answer in my research.
Perfect. Let's move on to recommendations for our audience to take action. If you have any ideas, let's start with Dr. Aich. What do you want the audience to do? You know, we're all charged up, we want to do something. What should we do?
I think the first thing is to have personal awareness about environmental justice as environmental pollution, and also create the awareness. I think house teaching is one of the, like, teaching your family, it can become very important, because what is environment? We take, in most of the cases, I think in US or in many of the places where we have, we are middle class or upper middle class, or in that places, many of the people are not facing the issues that lower and lower middle income people are facing in terms of their habitat and environment that they live in. So they don't create, and also water. So from environmental engineering perspective, if you people in general public don't know who environmental engineers are. People know about chemical engineers, mechanical engineers, and I have faced that because we take water for granted that is coming out of tap. So that understanding of, basic understanding of why environmental engineering is needed, how we are getting water, and how precious is water, that generalization or awareness is not there in the people who are taking it for granted. So I think that has to come first, because who are suffering, they already understand that. But who are not suffering, most of the people don't understand that concept. So having that communication and discussion can create a larger scenarios, because when it comes to saving the water, the awareness is a must. If that doesn't come, water saving doesn't come, and then we cannot take the water to other people who really needs the water. Okay. Yeah.
Great. Dr. Saya, recommendations?
Yes, so I had a few recommendations. I think the first was, the first thing you could do is to try to, find out what are local watershed groups and how they could use help, how they could volunteer, how you could volunteer. And maybe also try to brainstorm how you can apply your skills that you have to serve a local watershed group, or even an environmental justice group. You can try to donate to these groups, and you can volunteer for them, as I said. And you can also write your representatives at the local, state, and federal level to support the work that they're doing. And I am a Buffalo native, so I know there's a lot of different and amazing water-related groups that are working hard in Buffalo to keep the waters clean and to serve communities that need help. And so I think I would recommend one in particular, the Buffalo Niagara River Keeper. They have a lot of things going on to help keep the waters clean. You can volunteer for a lot of different things that they do. So definitely check out their website. And I know another group, the Massachusetts Avenue Project, they do a lot of environmental justice and training of the community to make the community a better place.
And we'll end with Dr. Boma. We have 30 seconds.
All right. So I'll try to make it very brief, and then I totally agree with what my colleagues have already said. What I would say is that we need to continue becoming politically conscious, because like I said, environmental justice is a political question. And the more we get people who become politically conscious, the better for us. So how can we do that? One way is for us to continue participating in conversations like this, symposium like this, joining groups that are having these conversations. That is number one. Number two, trying and then supporting people who are environmentally conscious for them to have elected positions. I totally believe in that. It could be scholars, it could be activists, but we need to make these people participate in the politics. People say politics is dirty, and I keep saying it's dirty because we keep on not washing it. So maybe we have to start washing politics. So we have
water.
Exactly, use water, exactly. So this is what we have to start doing. And then the last part is what I call relational politics. So in this current age, we are seeing so much of the movement coming on. So we have all these different forms of movement, women movement, gun violence movement. We have all this movement. We have to try and then find some kind of relationship with all this movement, because we are all struggling for the same thing, and we have to have conversations amongst us. So the movement in the 1960s and 70s, we have to replicate them, but more or less we have to also join hands and then start talking to different people who are also going through these struggles that we are trying to pursue. I hope I didn't exceed 30 minutes. Thank you so much.
30 seconds over, but good. On that note of solidarity, thank you so much, Dr. Saya, Dr. Aich, and Dr. Boma. And with that, goodbye. And welcome to our water protectors who will be talking to us about protecting water.